Hi everyone, welcome back to Mindful Morsels by Sam H. Lee. Mindful Morsels is a Substack newsletter that talks about everything ranging from post-grad life, that's post-undergrad life, Notion, and tech trends, all observed and contextualized by me, Sam. And this is part 3 out of 3, so we're wrapping up this mini series of my China trip. And I recently had the opportunity to go to China for a very short time, only 8 days. And that might not sound short in absolute terms, but for any trip for Asia, that is considered pretty short. And it was a pretty last minute endeavor because essentially, like, once I got my full-time job that I'll be starting in about a week and a half, I was quickly whisked away, metaphorically, but also a little literally, to China to see my mother's side of the family. And if you want to learn more about that, feel free to read the first out of the trilogy here, and I talk a lot more about that. And I just wrapped up talking about the tech transformation I saw in China. This final concluding part of the China trip series, and this audio companion to the written word, is the Chinese American experience and what exactly that means at this time, July 2024. I start off this piece talking about the cultural challenges and like adaptation one perhaps could go through as a Chinese American. I think for me, it's always a little confusing going back to China because like it's my home technically, like from a maybe like history ancestor point of view, but like it does feel like I'm navigating like a labyrinth of this cultural subtleties. Even like direct translations don't work super well, so sometimes like when you hear things, whether that's Mandarin or Cantonese or some other dialect, like you have to filter through and like understand it maybe like a second time before you respond. And I talk about how like this kind of cultural dance, it feels like both alien and familiar because it's something that I feel like happens every time we go back to China, but each time it's a little different. And I take a step back and talk about like what I've recently done, and by recently I mean in the past 4 years when I was a college student of like trying to figure out this identity. So I went to Georgetown University, which is a school in Washington, D.C., and I had the opportunity to join the Chinese Student Alliance and then eventually become co-president of the Chinese Student Alliance my junior year of college. And just based on the very like limited pool I met of Chinese Americans and Chinese international students at Georgetown, I realized that compared to like perhaps other groups that have like these dual identities, like Chinese Americans, at least at Georgetown, tended to skew more like American than Chinese. Like when we got together, it was clear that like most of us had grew up most of our lives in America, and we like were more comfortable using English to talk to each other over Mandarin. And I think those reasons and more cultural reasons made it so there was like a clear distinction between like from what I understood as like a Chinese American student compared to like a Chinese international student. That definitely doesn't mean like we didn't get along like friends are friends, but it's just like a cultural thing where there was just a clear difference. And that, I think, experience led me to just feel more like on my American side than Chinese side, especially because I at that point had not been back to China in almost a decade. But going to China again surprised me in terms of like how fast I was able to pick up some cultural norms, especially like supporting the elderly and like even just having like simple conversations in Mandarin with my relatives and also just people that I interacted with and encountered on a daily basis. And I realized that like even though I grew up here in the States and like had just an overall great childhood here, I was able to like pick up more of the Chinese culture than I thought, and I'm sure I owe like most of that to my parents. And I wrap up the newsletter talking about where I feel like this experience of first like going through the advocacy and trying to better understand my own identity in college, and then this most recent China trip that I just completed and where it leaves me. I will be honest, like I did try using Duolingo, not for Mandarin because I think Mandarin is like more stable, but because almost or everyone on my mom's side like speaks Cantonese, so I like started using Duolingo to like learn Cantonese during the trip. That quickly like failed. I think it might just be like a timing thing or just like it's for me like I don't know why it's just like hard to take Duolingo seriously. So we'll see. Like maybe I'll give it another shot. But I think that like later on, I could definitely explore other opportunities to like work on not just like the language that I want to work on, but also just like immersing myself in that culture. But we'll have to seek out those opportunities. And I think that like the biggest takeaway, not only for this newsletter piece, but just wrapping up the trilogy of like my China podcast newsletter reflections is like I want to keep making a better effort to like balance the American and Chinese sides of me. I think that each have had their moment at like certain times of my life, and I think I definitely have been able to like talk a lot of things out with like my family and also like other friends who are either like also Chinese American or also navigating this like weird mix of identities. And it's, I'll be honest, like it's not something I think about on a daily basis. But it's just like when you go on a trip like this, it's a nice time to reflect. And I guess this is me reflecting now. And yeah, I don't know like what that means for my future content or like the future experiences I have, but I definitely think that coming out of college and then this China trip, I'm a lot more keen on figuring out like concrete ways to balance those identities and just like have deeper connections with my history and all of that. So who knows where that'll lead. That wraps up this audio companion piece to the newsletter where I talk about balancing these dual identities. If you resonate with anything, feel free to start a discussion in the comments section. Mindful Morsels by Sam H. Lee on Substack, posting consistently. And on that Substack, you'll also be able to find links to my other accounts, such as my Notion account, YouTube, Instagram, all of that. If you're interested in anything post-grad related, Notion related, tech related, from my perspective, it's all there. And that's it for this time, and we'll see you next time.